My name is Audrey Wilson, 27, and I never thought my own parents would leave me in physical pain while secretly buying my sister a BMW. The constant throbbing in my knee has been my companion since childhood, but their refusal to help with surgery costs despite our family wealth cut deeper than any scalpel could. When I discovered they spent $75,000 on Stephanie's dream car after telling me my surgery was too expensive, I was shattered. Until my grandfather Harold made one phone call that changed everything. If you've ever experienced family inequality, share your story in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to find out how my grandfather turned everything around with just one call. Growing up in our spacious colonial home in Fairfield, Connecticut, I never wanted for material things. My parents, Thomas and Diana Wilson, provided a comfortable upper-middle-class lifestyle for my sister Stephanie and me. Dad worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm, while Mom managed several rental properties they owned. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family, but beneath the surface, the dynamics were far from equal. From our earliest childhood, it was clear that Stephanie was the golden child. 3 years older than me, she excelled at everything she touched. Straight A student, homecoming queen, tennis team captain, debate club president. My parents beamed with pride at her every accomplishment, while my achievements often went unnoticed. When Stephanie won first place in the science fair, Dad bought her a new laptop. When I won an art competition, I got a pat on the back and a "good job, kiddo." The pattern continued throughout our childhood. Stephanie got brand new clothes at the start of each school year, while I inherited her hand-me-downs. She received expensive tennis lessons when she showed interest in the sport. But when I wanted to take art classes, Mom said I could practice at home instead. Birthday parties for Stephanie were elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, custom cakes, and expensive gifts. Mine were simple gatherings with just a few friends. I was 12 when the accident happened. My grandfather Harold, my dad's father and the only family member who seemed to see me, had gifted me riding lessons for my birthday. He knew I loved horses and had been begging my parents for lessons for years. On a crisp autumn day, I was learning to jump with my favorite horse, a gentle chestnut mare named Cinnamon. Something spooked her mid-jump, and she bucked, sending me flying. I landed awkwardly, my right knee taking the full impact. The pain was excruciating. I remember screaming as the instructor rushed to my side. My parents were called immediately, and to their credit, they came right away. The emergency room doctor diagnosed a torn ACL, meniscus damage, and several fractures. I underwent surgery that night, but the doctor warned that I might need additional procedures as I grew. For the first few weeks, my parents were attentive. Mom brought me soup and helped me with my homework. Dad carried me up and down the stairs. But as the weeks stretched into months, and I still complained of pain, their sympathy waned. "Stop being so dramatic, Audrey," became a common phrase in our household. Stephanie broke her arm once, and she never complained this much. By the time I was 15, I'd learned to keep my pain to myself. I popped ibuprofen like candy and wore a knee brace under my jeans. Meanwhile, Stephanie continued to shine. When she was accepted to Yale, my parents threw a massive party and gifted her a MacBook Pro. When I got into Rhode Island School of Design with a partial scholarship for graphic design, Dad's response was, "Well, at least you got some money for that art hobby." Now, at 27, I've built a decent life for myself. After graduating from RISD, I found work as a graphic designer at a small marketing firm in Boston. My apartment is tiny but affordable, and I make enough to cover my bills with a little left over each month. Nothing like my sister, who at 30 works at an investment bank in New York City, lives in a luxury apartment, and takes lavish vacations twice a year. I know this because my mother never stops talking about Stephanie's success during our weekly phone calls. The pain in my knee never fully went away. Over the years, it worsened, especially during cold weather or after long days sitting at my desk. I learned to manage it with physical therapy exercises, over-the-counter pain medication, and occasional cortisone shots when things got really bad. But by last winter, the pain had become unbearable. Simple tasks like climbing the stairs to my third-floor walk-up or walking to the subway left me in agony. Throughout everything, my grandfather Harold remained my rock. After my grandmother passed away 5 years ago, he moved to a beautiful home just outside Boston to be closer to me. Every Sunday, we meet for lunch. And he listens to my stories without judgment or comparison. A self-made businessman who built a successful construction company from scratch, Harold understood hard work and perseverance. Unlike my parents, he never made me feel like I was less than. Family gatherings became increasingly difficult to endure. Last Thanksgiving at my parents' house, I watched as they fawned over Stephanie's promotion while barely acknowledging my recent design award. When I excused myself early, claiming knee pain, my mother rolled her eyes. "Always something with you, isn't there?" she said. I caught my grandfather's concerned gaze across the table, but I just smiled weakly and limped to my old bedroom. I'd grown accustomed to being the afterthought in my family. The second best, the other daughter. But I never imagined that my own parents would deny me medical care while indulging my sister's every whim. That revelation was still waiting for me, lurking just around the corner, ready to shatter what little faith I had left in my family's love. The morning I finally admitted I needed surgery stands out vividly in my memory. I woke up unable to bend my knee at all, the joint swollen to twice its normal size. The pain radiated from my knee up through my thigh and down to my ankle, a burning, throbbing sensation that made me nauseated. After calling in sick to work, I managed to get an emergency appointment with Dr. Kimberly Chin, an orthopedic specialist who had been monitoring my condition for the past year. "This isn't good, Audrey," Dr. Kimberly said, examining the MRI results on her computer screen. Her office was bright and modern, diplomas from Harvard Medical School adorning the walls. "The damage has progressed significantly since your last visit." She pointed to various gray areas on the scan, explaining in detail what we were seeing. "Your ACL has completely deteriorated. The partial tear in your meniscus has become a full tear. And here," she pointed to another area, "we're seeing the beginning stages of arthritis setting in. At your age, this is concerning." I swallowed hard, trying to process the information. "What does this mean?" "It means you need surgery, and soon." Dr. Kimberly's expression was serious. "We're looking at a complete ACL reconstruction, meniscus repair, and possibly some cartilage grafting to prevent further arthritic development." "How soon are we talking?" I asked, my voice small. "Ideally, within the next month. The longer we wait, the more permanent damage occurs." "You're young, Audrey. Without intervention, you're looking at a knee replacement by 40. And significant mobility issues in the meantime." She pulled out a notepad and began writing. "I'm referring you to Dr. Jonathan Bradford. He's the best orthopedic surgeon in Boston for this type of procedure. I'll send over your records today." Dr. Kimberly handed me the referral slip, along with some pamphlets about the surgery. "Do you have any questions?" I had dozens, but one loomed larger than the rest. "How much will this cost?" Her expression softened. "Your insurance will cover part of it, but there will be significant out-of-pocket expenses. Dr. Bradford's office can give you an exact breakdown, but you're looking at around $45,000, including the surgery, hospital stay, anesthesia, and initial physical therapy." The number hit me like a punch to the stomach. $45,000. That was more than I made in a year. My insurance would cover about 60%. But that still left me responsible for $18,000, not counting lost wages during recovery. "The recovery period is about 6 months, Dr. Kimberly continued, seemingly reading my thoughts. "You'll need at least 6 weeks before you can return to desk work, and you'll be on crutches for most of that time." I left her office with a folder full of information and a head full of worries. My savings account held exactly $4,327.89. Enough for first and last month's rent if I ever moved, but nowhere near enough for major surgery. That evening, I called my best friend Cassandra Kelly, who lived in the apartment below mine. She came up immediately, bringing a bottle of wine and a sympathetic ear. "What about a payment plan?" she suggested as we sat on my worn sofa, glasses of cheap Merlot in hand. "Even if they let me pay it off over a year, that's still $1,500 a month. There's no way I can swing that and still pay rent, buy food, exist." Cassandra tucked her legs underneath her. "What about your parents? They have money, right?" I sighed, swirling the wine in my glass. "They do. But you know how they are about money when it comes to me." "This is different, Audrey. This is your health." I nodded slowly. Despite our complicated relationship, surely my parents wouldn't let me suffer when they had the means to help. Dad's financial advisory practice was thriving, and Mom's rental properties generated substantial passive income. They had recently renovated their kitchen for $80,000, a fact Mom had mentioned repeatedly during our last phone call. The next day, I met with Hannah Park, the financial counselor at Dr. Bradford's office. She was sympathetic but realistic about my options. "We can offer a payment plan, but the most we can stretch it is 18 months, she explained, showing me the numbers on her tablet. "That would be approximately $1,000 a month. Are there any assistance programs I might qualify for?" I asked. Hannah shook her head. "Unfortunately, your income is too high for most medical assistance programs, but too low to comfortably afford this procedure. It's a common predicament." She tapped a few more numbers into her calculator. "With your insurance and current financial situation, I would recommend exploring personal loans or asking family members for assistance." Over the next week, the pain in my knee worsened. I began using a cane to walk, the prescription pain medication making me foggy at work. My boss, Alan Wright, was understanding but concerned. "Take the time you need to figure this out," he said. "Your health comes first. We can arrange for some remote work during your recovery." His kindness only made my decision clearer. I needed to ask my parents for help. Despite years of emotional distance and subtle favoritism, they were still my parents. Surely they wouldn't want me to suffer. That Sunday, during our weekly lunch, I confided in my grandfather about the situation. "Of course you should ask them," Harold said, his weathered hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "This isn't a frivolous request, Audrey. This is your quality of life." "I'm scared they'll say no," I admitted. "I don't think I could handle that rejection." Harold's blue eyes, so like my own, held steady. "Sometimes we have to give people the opportunity to do the right thing. If they don't, well, that tells you something important too." Armed with my medical records, insurance information, and a carefully rehearsed speech, I called my parents and asked if I could come for dinner the following weekend. Mom sounded surprised but agreed, mentioning that Stephanie would also be visiting. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of hope and dread. Hope that my parents would step up and help me through this medical crisis. Dread that I was setting myself up for yet another disappointment. Little did I know just how devastating that disappointment would be. The drive to Fairfield took just under 2 hours, my knee aching despite the cushion I'd placed under it. As I pulled into the familiar driveway of my childhood home, I noticed Stephanie's sleek Audi already parked near the garage. She'd had the same car for years, a college graduation gift from our parents. I took a deep breath, gathered my folder of medical information, and made my way to the front door, leaning heavily on my cane. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open, revealing my mother's perfectly coiffed blonde hair and critical gaze. "Oh, Audrey, what's with the cane? You didn't mention you were injured again." Her emphasis on again stung more than she knew. "It's actually what I wanted to talk to you and Dad about," I said, stepping inside the immaculate foyer. The house smelled of roast chicken and lemon furniture polish, unchanged since my childhood. Mom led me to the dining room where Dad and Stephanie were already seated, engrossed in conversation about Stephanie's recent business trip to London. Dad stood when he saw me, his expression shifting from animated to concerned as he noticed my cane. "What happened?" he asked, pulling out a chair for me. "Let's eat first," Mom interjected. "The food will get cold." Dinner was torture. I picked at my food while Stephanie dominated the conversation with stories about her important clients and upcoming promotion. Mom and Dad hung on her every word, asking questions and offering congratulations. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, I cleared my throat. "I wanted to talk to you all about something important," I began, my heart pounding. "I've been having serious problems with my knee, the one I injured when I was 12. Still?" Mom raised an eyebrow. "That was 15 years ago, Audrey." I pulled out the MRI images and placed them on the table. "The injury never properly healed, and it's gotten much worse. My doctor says I need surgery right away." Dad picked up one of the images, squinting at it. "What kind of surgery are we talking about?" I explained everything Dr. Kimberly and Dr. Bradford had told me about the procedure, recovery time, and prognosis. Mom and Dad exchanged glances as I spoke, while Stephanie at least had the decency to look concerned. "The problem is," I continued, "the surgery costs $45,000. My insurance will cover part of it, but I still need about $18,000, plus I'll be out of work for at least 6 weeks. I took a deep breath. "I've been saving, but I only have about $4,000. I was hoping you might be able to help me." The silence that followed was deafening. Dad set down his fork, his expression unreadable. Mom's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's a lot of money, Audrey," Dad finally said. "I know it is. But this is an elective surgery. If I don't get it, I could end up with permanent disability." Mom sighed dramatically. "Have you looked into other options? Physical therapy? Those knee braces they advertise on TV." "Mom, this isn't something a brace can fix. My ACL is completely torn, and I'm developing arthritis. I've tried everything else." "What about a second opinion?" Dad suggested. "Sometimes these doctors recommend surgery when it's not really necessary. They're running businesses after all." I felt my face flush with anger and embarrassment. "This is my third opinion, Dad. I've seen multiple specialists. Have you looked into doing it at a teaching hospital?" Stephanie chimed in. "I heard they do procedures at reduced rates." "I've explored every option," I said, my voice tight. "Dr. Bradford is the best surgeon for this in Boston, and even with a payment plan, I can't afford it on my own." Dad leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Audrey, your mother and I have made some significant investments recently. Our portfolio isn't as liquid as it used to be." "We're not saying no," Mom added quickly. "We're just saying not right now. Maybe in a few months when some of our investments mature." "I don't have a few months," I insisted, pulling out Dr. Kimberly's report. "The damage is getting worse every day." "You've managed this long," Dad said dismissively. "A few more months won't make that much difference." "Actually, it will. Did you even look at the reports?" I pushed them closer to him, my hand shaking. "Every day I wait, the arthritis gets worse. The damage becomes more permanent." Mom placed her hand over mine, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. "Honey, we understand you're in pain. But $18,000 is a lot of money, and frankly, you haven't always been the most financially responsible person." "What is that supposed to mean?" I demanded. "Well, you chose a career in graphic design instead of something more practical. And you're almost 30 with less than $5,000 in savings. I make $55,000 a year in one of the most expensive cities in the country. I pay my own rent, my own bills, my own student loans. I've never asked you for money before. And we appreciate that," Dad said. "But right now, the timing just isn't good for us." The conversation devolved from there. I presented logical arguments about the medical necessity of the surgery, the long-term costs of delaying treatment, and the relatively modest amount I was asking for compared to their overall wealth. They responded with vague financial excuses, suggestions for cheaper alternatives that wouldn't work, and thinly veiled implications that I was being dramatic. Stephanie mostly stayed quiet, occasionally offering sympathetic looks, but never actually advocating for me. At one point, she suggested I start a GoFundMe campaign, as if begging strangers on the internet for money was preferable to my own parents helping me. After an hour of circular arguments, Dad finally put his foot down. "We've made our decision, Audrey. We can't help you right now. Maybe in the fall if our investments perform as expected." I drove back to Boston that night with tears streaming down my face, the rejection cutting deeper than the physical pain in my knee. My own parents had essentially told me that my health, my ability to walk without pain, was not worth $18,000 to them. Meanwhile, they had recently spent $80,000 renovating a kitchen that was perfectly functional before. Over the next week, I received several text messages from my parents, all reinforcing their position while attempting to sound concerned. From Mom, "Have you looked into those stem cell injections?" Margaret from my book club says her son had great results. From Dad, "Sent you a link to an article about alternative treatments for knee pain. Much less expensive than surgery." None of their messages acknowledged the actual medical reality of my situation or offered any real help. I stopped responding after a few days, the pain of their rejection too fresh to engage with their half-hearted suggestions. What I didn't know then was that their claims of financial constraints were about to be exposed as the lies they were, setting in motion a chain of events that would forever change our family dynamic. 2 weeks after the devastating dinner with my parents, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, The Grind, trying to work despite the constant ache in my knee. The small cafe was my regular Saturday morning spot, with its mismatched furniture and excellent espresso. I was deeply focused on a logo design for a new client when a familiar voice interrupted my concentration. "Audrey? Is that you?" I looked up to see Brittany Adams, one of Stephanie's friends from college. We had met several times at family events over the years, though we had never been close. "Brittany, hi," I said, forcing a smile. "What brings you to Boston?" "Job interview," she replied, gesturing to her smart business suit. "Mind if I join you for a minute?" I cleared some space at my tiny table, and she sat down with her latte. We exchanged pleasantries, discussing her potential job and my graphic design work. I was about to make an excuse to return to my project when she said something that caught my attention. "I saw Stephanie last weekend. Love her new BMW. Your parents are so generous." I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Her new what?" Brittany's eyes widened slightly, sensing she had said something wrong. "Her BMW. The 5 Series? She picked it up last week." She paused, studying my expression. "I assumed you knew." "Right, of course," I said, my mind racing. "The BMW." It slipped my mind. Brittany looked uncomfortable, quickly changing the subject to ask about good restaurants in the area. After a few minutes of forced conversation, she glanced at her watch and excused herself, saying she needed to prepare for her interview. As soon as she left, I pulled out my phone and checked Stephanie's Instagram. Sure enough, there it was. Posted 3 days ago, a photo of Stephanie standing next to a gleaming new white BMW, captioned, "New Car Day." So blessed. #BMW, #dream car, #adulting. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. I scrolled through the comments until I found one from our mother. "You deserve it, sweetheart. So proud of all your hard work." I sat there for a long time, my design work forgotten, trying to make sense of what I had just learned. My parents had claimed they couldn't afford $18,000 for a surgery that would alleviate my daily pain and prevent permanent disability. Yet they had apparently just bought Stephanie a brand new luxury car. That evening, I drove to Stephanie's apartment complex in Cambridge. I told myself I just wanted confirmation, That perhaps Brittany was mistaken or Stephanie had bought the car herself. Deep down, though, I already knew the truth. I found the car easily, parked in a visitor spot near her building. A gleaming white BMW 5 Series with temporary tags still on it. I sat in my old Honda Civic, staring at the luxury vehicle that represented my parents' priorities in such a stark, undeniable way. As I was about to leave, Stephanie emerged from her building, keys in hand. She stopped short when she saw me, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to guilt. "Audrey, what are you doing here?" She clutched her designer purse tighter. I got out of my car, leaning on my cane. "Nice car." She glanced at the BMW, then back at me. "Thanks. I was going to tell you about it." "When?" "After I've had my knee replacement at 40. Stephanie had the decency to look embarrassed. "Look, I didn't ask them for it. They offered. They offered to buy you a brand new BMW. But they can't help me pay for necessary surgery." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "How much did that car cost, Stephanie?" She hesitated, then sighed. "About $75. 000 with the upgrades." The number hit me like a physical blow. $75,000. More than 4 times what I had asked to borrow for my surgery. I leaned more heavily on my cane, suddenly feeling dizzy. "Did you know?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did you know they told me they couldn't afford to help with my surgery when you accepted this car? They mentioned you had asked for money." She admitted. "But they said it was for some experimental procedure that probably wouldn't work anyway." "Experimental?" I laughed bitterly. "It's standard orthopedic surgery, Stephanie. ACL reconstruction. The same surgery professional athletes get." She shifted uncomfortably. "Dad said your problems were mostly psychological. That you've always exaggerated your pain for attention." That revelation hurt worse than the betrayal of the car. My own father thought I was making up my pain, despite the MRIs, despite the multiple medical opinions, despite the fact that I now walked with a cane at 27. "Well, I guess this answers where I stand in the family hierarchy," I said, gesturing to the BMW. "Somewhere below your transportation preferences." "That's not fair, Audrey. My career is important. I need to project a certain image to clients. And I need to be able to walk without pain. But I guess that's just not as important, is it?" I turned to leave, but Stephanie called after me. "Wait, maybe I could help. I could loan you some money." I faced her again, anger and hurt making my voice shake. "I don't want your charity, Stephanie. I wanted our parents to care about my well-being as much as they care about your image." As soon as I got home, I called my parents, unable to contain my anger and hurt any longer. Mom answered, her voice cheerful until she realized it was me. "Audrey, is everything okay?" "No, Mom, everything is not okay. I just saw Stephanie's new BMW." There was a pause then. "Oh, that." "Yes, that. The $75,000 car you bought her right after telling me you couldn't afford $18,000 for my surgery." "Your father's on the extension," Mom said instead of responding directly. "We're putting you on speakerphone." "Audrey," Dad's voice came through. "I can explain." "Please do," I said. "Explain how you can afford a luxury car for Stephanie but not necessary medical care for me." "It's not that simple," he began. "The car is an investment in Stephanie's career. In her industry. Appearances matter. She needs to project success to attract high net worth clients. And I need to be able to walk without pain," I countered. "But I guess that's not an investment worth making." "Don't be dramatic," Mom interjected. "You've always had a flair for exaggeration." "I have medical records, Mom. Multiple doctors have confirmed I need this surgery." "We're not saying you don't," Dad said in his patronizing financial advisor voice. "We're just saying the timing isn't right for us financially. The car was planned for in our annual budget. Your surgery request was unexpected. So, if I had scheduled my injury to align with your financial planning, you would have helped me?" I asked incredulously. "Now you're just being difficult," Mom sighed. "Honestly, Audrey, This jealousy of your sister has got to stop. It's not attractive. Jealousy? You think this is about jealousy? This is about the fact that you prioritize Stephanie's want for a luxury car over my need for surgery. We prioritized a sound financial decision, Dad insisted. Stephanie's career advancement benefits all of us in the long run. And what about my career? My quality of life? Does that benefit anyone? Of course it does, honey. Mom said in a placating tone that made my blood boil. We want you to be happy. We just think you might be rushing into the surgery without exploring all options. The conversation continued in this vein for another 20 minutes. My parents deflected, minimized, and rationalized their decision in every way possible. They spoke about Stephanie's career as if it was the family business, while my graphic design work was dismissed as a hobby. They suggested more physical therapy, more pain medication, more waiting. Anything but acknowledging the fundamental unfairness of their actions. By the time I hung up, I was sobbing uncontrollably. The physical pain in my knee seemed almost secondary to the emotional agony of knowing where I truly stood with my parents. The revelation of the BMW had torn away the last shreds of the comforting fiction I had maintained, that my parents loved both their daughters equally, even if they sometimes showed it differently. That night, I cried myself to sleep, feeling more alone than I ever had before. But as the saying goes, it's always darkest before dawn. And my dawn would come from an unexpected source. My grandfather Harold, the one person who had always seen me clearly and loved me unconditionally. Sunday lunch with Grandpa Harold had been our tradition since he moved to Boston 5 years ago. We alternated between his elegant townhouse in Beacon Hill and various restaurants around the city. This particular Sunday, we were meeting at his place, where his housekeeper Maria always prepared an amazing meal before discreetly disappearing for the afternoon. I arrived at noon. The familiar scent of Maria's cooking greeting me as Harold opened the door. At 78, my grandfather remained impressively spry, his tall frame only slightly stooped with age. His silver hair was still thick, and his blue eyes, so like my own, remained sharp and observant. "There's my girl," he said warmly, enveloping me in a gentle hug. As he pulled back, his smile faded, concern etching across his face. "You look terrible, Audrey. What's happened?" I tried to smile, but my lips trembled traitorously. "Just knee pain, Grandpa. Nothing new." He ushered me inside, helping me to his sunlit dining room where the table was already set with fine china and crystal water glasses. "I wasn't born yesterday," he said, pulling out a chair for me. "This is more than physical pain. I can see it in your eyes." As Maria served us her famous roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, I tried to maintain light conversation, asking about his week and the book club he had recently joined. But Harold wasn't easily distracted. "Enough small talk," he said finally, setting down his fork. "Tell me what's wrong, Audrey." "All of it." Something about his direct gaze and genuine concern broke through my defenses. I told him everything: the diagnosis, the surgery I needed, my parents' refusal to help, and finally, the devastating discovery of Stephanie's new BMW. $75,000, I said, my voice cracking. "That's what they spent on her car while telling me they couldn't afford $18,000 for my surgery." Harold listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, his weathered hands folded in front of him. "I suspected as much," he finally said. "But I had hoped I was wrong." "Suspected what?" "That Thomas and Diana's favoritism toward Stephanie had crossed from merely hurtful into something more sinister." He reached across the table, covering my hand with his. "I'm so sorry, my dear." No child should feel less valued by their parents, regardless of age. "I don't know what to do, Grandpa," I admitted. "I can't afford the surgery on my own, and the pain keeps getting worse." "What did your doctor say would happen without surgery?" I repeated Dr. Kimberly's warnings about progressive damage, early onset arthritis, and the likelihood of needing a full knee replacement by 40. Harold nodded thoughtfully. And your parents are fully aware of these medical facts? Yes. I showed them all the documentation. The MRIs, everything. They still claimed they couldn't afford to help right now, while simultaneously purchasing a luxury vehicle for your sister. His voice was measured, but I could detect the anger beneath his calm exterior. Exactly. Tears welled in my eyes again. I know it sounds childish to say it's not fair, but it's not fair. There's nothing childish about expecting basic fairness from your parents, Audrey. Harold took a sip of water, his eyes thoughtful. You've mentioned other instances of favoritism over the years. Tell me more about those. For the next hour, I found myself recounting incidents I had almost forgotten. Stephanie receiving a car for her 16th birthday while I got driving lessons. My parents attending every one of Stephanie's tennis matches, but missing my art show because it conflicted with their schedule. The elaborate graduation party they threw for Stephanie versus the dinner reservation for 4 they made for mine. As I spoke, Harold asked occasional clarifying questions, his expression becoming increasingly troubled. When I finally ran out of examples, he was silent for several minutes. I'm going to make a few calls, he said eventually, his voice resolute. What kind of calls? I asked, confused. The necessary kind. He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked Beacon Hill. There are some things you don't know about your family's financial situation, Audrey. Things that I believe will be very relevant to your current predicament. What things? He turned back to me, his expression softening. I'd rather wait until I have all the facts before I say more. But I promise you this, you will get the surgery you need, and some long overdue truths will come to light. Before I could press him further, he changed the subject, asking about my latest design projects. Though curious, I respected his discretion and allowed the conversation to move in a lighter direction. As lunch concluded, Harold shared a bit of his own history that he had never told me before. Did you know my parents effectively disowned me when I was 20? He asked. No, I said, surprised. You never mentioned that. They disapproved of my marriage to your grandmother. Thought I was marrying beneath my station. A sad smile crossed his face. I worked construction during the day and took business classes at night to support us. Built my company from nothing while they lived in their mansion, pretending I didn't exist. That's terrible, Grandpa. It was a valuable lesson. I learned that true family supports each other, no matter what. When I had success, I didn't lord it over them or seek revenge. But I did create very specific plans for how my wealth would be distributed. His eyes met mine meaningfully. Very specific plans indeed. As I was preparing to leave, my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't expected, Martin Goldstein, my parents' family lawyer. I showed the phone to Harold, whose expression revealed nothing. You should answer that, he said mildly. Audrey? Martin Goldstein here, came the formal voice when I answered. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. No, it's fine, I replied, confused. What can I do for you? I'm calling to request your presence at a family meeting this coming Saturday at your grandfather's residence. Your parents and sister will also be in attendance. It's regarding a matter of significant family importance. I looked at Harold, who nodded encouragingly. Sure. What time? 2 o'clock. Please bring your medical records regarding your knee condition. My medical records? Why? All will be explained at the meeting. Do you need assistance with transportation given your current mobility issues? No, I can manage. Excellent. I'll see you Saturday then. Good day. As I hung up, I turned to Harold with wide eyes. What did you do? He simply patted my shoulder. I made a phone call, as I said I would. Sometimes, Audrey, people need to be reminded of their obligations, both legal and moral. I left my grandfather's home that day with more questions than answers, but also with something I had been lacking, hope. Whatever Harold had set in motion, I sensed it would change everything. I just didn't realize how complete that change would be, or how long overdue the reckoning that was coming. The week leading up to Saturday's mysterious meeting crawled by at an excruciating pace. My knee pain seemed to intensify with my anxiety, requiring stronger medication that left me foggy at work. Several times, I almost called Harold to demand answers, but something held me back. The certainty in his eyes when he said, "You will get the surgery you need," gave me the patience to wait. By the time Saturday arrived, my nerves were frayed. I dressed carefully in a simple navy blue dress that projected professionalism without ostentation. The contrast with Stephanie's designer wardrobe would be obvious, but I refused to play that game anymore. I arrived at Harold's townhouse 15 minutes early, but was still the last to arrive. Martin Goldstein's sleek black Mercedes was parked outside, along with my parents' Lexus SUV and Stephanie's new BMW. The sight of the luxury car made my stomach clench, but I took a deep breath and made my way up the steps, leaning heavily on my cane. Harold himself opened the door, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit that reminded me he had once been one of Boston's most successful businessmen. "Right on time," he said warmly, helping me inside. "Everyone's in the study." The tension in Harold's wood-paneled study was palpable. My parents sat stiffly on a leather sofa, while Stephanie perched on an armchair nearby, her expression anxious. Martin Goldstein stood by the large mahogany desk, arranging documents with methodical precision. All eyes turned to me as I entered. "Audrey, sweetheart," Mom said with forced brightness. "How are you feeling?" "About the same," I replied coolly, taking the seat Harold indicated, directly across from my parents. "Still needing surgery." Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Audrey, we've been thinking about your situation, and—" "Thomas," Martin interrupted, "perhaps we should follow the agenda I've prepared." Dad fell silent immediately, something I had rarely seen happen. Whatever was going on, it had clearly altered the usual family power dynamics. "Thank you all for coming," Martin began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "I've called this meeting at Harold's request to address some significant matters related to the Wilson family finances and trust arrangements." My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Stephanie looked confused. I simply waited, my hands folded in my lap. "Before we begin," Martin continued, "I should clarify that while I have served as the Wilson family attorney for many years, the documents I'm about to present relate to Harold Wilson's estate planning, for which I also serve as executor and trustee." Harold moved to stand beside Martin, his presence commanding despite his age. "I think it's time we clarified some misunderstandings about where the family wealth originated," he said calmly. With that introduction, Harold began a methodical presentation that left me stunned. Using documents projected onto a screen, he traced the history of the Wilson family finances over the past 40 years. "Thomas," he addressed my father directly, "while you've built a respectable career as a financial advisor, the majority of your current lifestyle is not, in fact, funded by your business." My father's face flushed. "Dad, I don't think this is appropriate to discuss in front of the girls." "On the contrary," Harold replied firmly. "It's long overdue." He turned to Martin, who handed him a thick folder. "The family home in Fairfield, the vacation property in Cape Cod, Diana's rental properties, and the majority of your investment portfolio all originated from seed capital that I provided." He pulled out documents showing transfers of funds dating back decades, all from Harold Wilson to Thomas and Diana Wilson. "When you were starting out, I wanted to give you advantages I never had. There's no shame in that. The shame comes in pretending you built everything yourself and in how you've allocated those resources among your children." Mom's face had gone pale. "Harold, please." "Please what, Diana? Please don't reveal that your rental empire began with properties I purchased and transferred to you. Please don't mention that your kitchen renovation last year was partially funded by a distribution from my trust." He turned to Stephanie, whose eyes had grown wide. "Stephanie, did you know that your BMW was purchased with money from a trust distribution that was intended for both you and your sister?" No, Stephanie whispered, glancing at our parents. They said it was from their savings. Martin stepped forward, opening another folder. The Wilson Family Trust was established by Harold in 1990 with explicit provisions for the benefit of all direct descendants equally. According to Section 4.3, distributions for education, medical care, and essential quality of life improvements must be made equally available to all beneficiaries. He pulled out a document and handed copies to everyone in the room. This is the BMW purchase agreement, dated exactly 1 week after Audrey requested assistance for her surgery. Next, he distributed copies of my medical records and surgery quote. And this is documentation of Audrey's medical need, which under the trust provisions would qualify as an essential quality of life expense. Dad stood up abruptly. This is outrageous. What we do with our money is our business. That's precisely the point, Thomas, Harold said quietly. It isn't entirely your money. And what you've done constitutes a violation of the trust provisions. Martin adjusted his glasses again. As trustee, I have a legal obligation to ensure the trust is administered properly. The preferential treatment shown to Stephanie at the expense of Audrey's health constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. Mom burst into tears. You're making it sound like we don't love Audrey. Of course we love her. Love is demonstrated through actions, Diana, Harold replied, his voice gentle but firm. And your actions tell a very different story than your words. He walked over to his desk and pressed a button on a small recorder. To my horror, my parents' voices filled the room. She's always been the dramatic one, came my father's voice. Remember when she sprained her ankle in high school and acted like she needed surgery then too? I know, my mother replied. Stephanie never complains about anything. She just gets on with it. But Audrey wants everyone to stop everything for her every little ache and pain. Exactly why we can't encourage this behavior by paying for an unnecessary surgery. Dr. Reynolds at the club says half these orthopedic procedures are completely avoidable. Besides, my mother added, we've already promised Stephanie the BMW. She's earned it with her promotion. Harold stopped the recording, the silence that followed deafening. This was from a phone call 3 weeks ago, he said quietly. After Audrey provided you with multiple medical opinions confirming the necessity of her surgery. Stephanie looked horrified. Mom, Dad, how could you say those things? You've seen Audrey limping. Using a cane. She's not making it up. I sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down my face. The casual cruelty of my parents' words, spoken when they thought no one was listening, confirmed every insecurity I'd ever felt about my place in the family. There are legal consequences for violating the trust provisions, Martin continued, seemingly unmoved by the emotional drama unfolding. As trustee, I could petition the court to remove Thomas and Diana as beneficiaries entirely. You wouldn't, Dad gasped. No, he wouldn't. Harold interjected. Because I've asked him not to. Instead, I'm proposing an alternative solution. He laid out his terms clearly. My surgery would be fully funded through the trust immediately, with additional provisions for physical therapy and recovery care. Furthermore, all future major expenses for both Stephanie and me would be reviewed by Martin to ensure equitable treatment. Finally, my parents would need to attend family counseling sessions to address the long-standing favoritism. And the BMW? Stephanie asked quietly. The car can remain, Harold said, retroactively allocating an equal amount to Audrey's trust portion to balance the distribution. My father tried to argue, bringing up tax implications and financial planning considerations. But Martin calmly dismantled each objection with precise legal language. You have a choice, Thomas, Harold said finally. Accept these terms, or face a full trust audit and potential removal as beneficiaries. The choice is yours. In that moment, I saw my father clearly, perhaps for the first time in my life. The bluster drained from him. revealing a man who had spent decades pretending to be self-made while secretly relying on his father's wealth. A man who had justified favoritism toward one daughter with rationalizations so thin they collapsed under the slightest scrutiny. "Fine," Dad said eventually. "We accept your terms." Mom was still crying softly. "We do love you, Audrey," she insisted. "We just didn't understand how serious your condition was." I looked at her skeptically. "You saw the MRIs, Mom. You heard the doctor's explanations. You saw me using a cane. You chose not to understand because it was inconvenient for your narrative." Stephanie stood up suddenly. "I'm so sorry, Audrey. I had no idea they were treating you this way. I would never have accepted the car if I'd known it meant you couldn't get your surgery." Her apology seemed genuine, making me wonder how much of our dysfunctional family dynamic had been orchestrated by our parents rather than Stephanie herself. Harold placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The real change that needs to happen here goes beyond money. This family has fundamental issues with fairness and honesty that money can't solve." He turned to my parents, his expression stern but not unkind. "The phone call I made wasn't just to Martin. It was to myself, years ago, when I decided to create a legacy of financial security for my family. What I failed to include were adequate safeguards to ensure that legacy would be distributed with love and fairness." The rest of the meeting focused on logistics, scheduling my surgery, arranging for post-operative care, setting up the family counseling sessions. Throughout it all, I sat in a daze, processing the revelations of the day. The knowledge that my grandfather had orchestrated this intervention, not just to secure my medical care, but to address the deeper wounds of favoritism that had shaped our family for decades. As everyone prepared to leave, my grandfather pulled me aside. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. I nodded, tears threatening again. "How long have you known?" "About the trust violations, I mean." "I've had suspicions for years," he admitted. "But I needed concrete evidence before I could act. Your surgery request and their response, followed by the BMW purchase, provided that evidence." "Thank you," I whispered, hugging him tightly. "Not just for the surgery, but for seeing me. For making them see me too." "You were always seen, Audrey," he replied. "Just not by the people who should have been looking the hardest." As I watched my parents leave, their shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no triumph. Only a profound sadness for all the years of conditional love and the long road to healing that lay ahead for all of us. The weeks following the confrontation at my grandfather's house were a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Bradford's office called the very next day to schedule my surgery, having received confirmation of payment from Martin Goldstein. The procedure was set for the following Thursday, giving me just enough time to arrange leave from work and prepare my apartment for the recovery period. My parents made awkward attempts to reach out. Mom sent a large fruit basket to my apartment with a card that read, "Thinking of you. Love, Mom and Dad." Dad called to ask if I needed help preparing for the surgery, his voice stiff with formality. I accepted their gestures with polite gratitude but maintained emotional distance. Years of feeling secondary couldn't be erased by a fruit basket and a phone call. Surprisingly, it was Stephanie who showed the most genuine remorse. She came to my apartment the Sunday before my surgery, looking uncharacteristically casual in jeans and a simple sweater. "I brought soup," she said, holding up a bag from my favorite deli. "And I thought maybe you could use help getting things ready for when you come home from the hospital." As we ate, an awkward silence stretched between us until Stephanie finally spoke. "I sold the BMW," she said quietly. "You what?" "I sold it. I couldn't keep it knowing how it came about." She stirred her soup absently. "I bought a used Subaru instead. The difference is going into an account for your recovery expenses that insurance won't cover." I was speechless. This was perhaps the first truly selfless act I could remember from my sister. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," Stephanie continued. "About how Mom and Dad treated us differently. I always thought it was because I worked harder, achieved more. But that's not true, is it? They just set different standards for us. Very different, I agreed. I'm sorry I never noticed. Or maybe I noticed, but didn't want to acknowledge it because it benefited me. She looked up, her eyes sincere. That wasn't fair to you. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. By the time Stephanie left that evening, having helped me rearrange furniture to accommodate crutches and prepared meals for my freezer, I felt a tentative bridge forming between us. A bridge built on adult understanding, rather than childhood competition. The surgery itself went smoothly. Dr. Bradford reported that the damage was extensive but reparable, confirming that the procedure had been absolutely necessary. When I woke in the recovery room, groggy from anesthesia, I was surprised to find not only my grandfather but also my parents sitting in the waiting area. The surgery was successful, Dr. Bradford told all of us. We repaired the ACL and meniscus and addressed the beginning arthritic changes. With proper physical therapy and recovery time, Audrey should regain full mobility and experience significant pain reduction. My parents nodded along, asking appropriate questions about recovery protocols and medication schedules. Their concerns seemed genuine, if belated. The first weeks of recovery were challenging. Simple tasks like showering or making a sandwich became Herculean efforts. My grandfather visited daily, bringing books, magazines, and gentle conversation. Cassandra from downstairs checked in regularly, helping with laundry and grocery runs. Most surprisingly, my parents established a rotation. Mom came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, Dad on Mondays and Wednesdays. At first, their visits were awkward, filled with superficial conversation and practical assistance. But as the weeks passed, something began to shift. During my third week of recovery, as Mom was helping me organize my medication, she suddenly broke down in tears. "I'm so sorry, Audrey," she sobbed. "I should have listened. I should have believed you were in pain." It was the first genuine apology I had received from either parent. Not excuses or justifications, just a simple acknowledgement of failure. "Why didn't you?" I asked, the question that had haunted me for years. Why was it so hard to believe me? Mom was quiet for a long moment. "I grew up with a mother who used illness for attention," she finally said. "Every headache was a migraine, every cold was pneumonia. When you started complaining about your knee, something in me just reacted. I projected my mother onto you. That wasn't fair." It wasn't a complete explanation for years of favoritism, but it was a start at understanding the complex dynamics that had shaped our family. Dad's moment came during a physical therapy session he accompanied me to in the fourth week. Watching me struggle through painful exercises, tears streaming down my face as I fought to bend my knee. Something seemed to break in him. "I did this," he whispered, more to himself than to me. "I could have prevented this." Later, as he drove me home, he confessed his own insecurities. "I always felt I had to prove myself to my father," he said. "Harold built his business from nothing, while I had advantages from the start." Stephanie was the daughter who seemed most likely to achieve great things, to make me look successful as a father. I poured everything into supporting her because her achievements felt like mine. "And my achievements didn't?" I asked. He sighed heavily. "They were in areas I didn't understand or value properly. That was my failure, not yours." The mandated family counseling sessions began 6 weeks after my surgery. Dr. Elaine Foster, a family therapist specializing in adult family dynamics, facilitated conversations that were often painful but necessary. In that safe space, years of resentment, favoritism, and miscommunication were gradually unpacked. Favoritism often stems from parents' own unresolved issues, Dr. Foster explained during one session. Children who remind parents of qualities they like or dislike in themselves receive different treatment as a result. Through these sessions, I learned that my artistic nature reminded Dad of his own creative dreams he had abandoned for a practical career. Stephanie's drive and ambition represented the path he had chosen instead. Mom saw her own mother's attention-seeking in my legitimate medical complaints, while Stephanie's stoicism mirrored Mom's own tendency to suppress needs and emotions. None of this excused their behavior, but understanding its roots helped me begin to process the hurt without internalizing it as rejection of my fundamental worth. 6 months after the surgery, I returned to Dr. Bradford for a follow-up. The X-rays showed proper healing, and my range of motion had improved dramatically. The constant pain that had been my companion for so many years had diminished to occasional discomfort after strenuous activity. "You're healing beautifully," Dr. Bradford said, reviewing my progress chart. "I'd say you're at about 85% of normal function, which is excellent for this stage of recovery." That evening, we had a family dinner at my grandfather's house to celebrate the milestone. The atmosphere was different from any family gathering I could remember, more genuine, more equal. Stephanie talked about her new position at a smaller firm that aligned better with her values. I shared news about the freelance graphic design business I had started during my recovery, using a portion of my trust allocation as seed money. Mom and Dad were different too. They listened more, interrupted less, and made visible efforts to engage equally with both Stephanie and me. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. After dinner, my grandfather invited me to join him for a walk in the small garden behind his townhouse. It was the first time since the surgery that I felt confident enough to walk any distance without pain or hesitation. "How does it feel?" he asked as we strolled among his carefully tended roses. "Strange," I admitted. "Not just my knee, but everything. Having my pain acknowledged after being dismissed for so long. Having financial support I can count on. Having parents who are actually trying to see me." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "Healing is rarely just physical, is it?" "No," I agreed. "The emotional healing might take longer than the knee. But it's happening," he observed. "I can see it in how you carry yourself, in how you speak to your parents. There's a confidence there that comes from knowing your worth doesn't depend on their validation." I thought about that for a moment. I think the most important thing I've learned is that I deserved better all along. The problem was never me, it was the dynamic they created. "That's a powerful realization," Harold said. "Many people never get there." We reached a small bench at the end of the garden path, and I sat down without the wincing pain that would have accompanied the movement months earlier. "The call you made," I said, turning to my grandfather. "It wasn't really to Martin, was it? It was the decision you made long ago to create safeguards for future generations, including me." Harold smiled, the afternoon sun highlighting the family resemblance between us. "The most important calls we make in life aren't on telephones, Audrey. They're the moments we decide to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Even when it means confronting people we love about their failures." As we sat together in the peaceful garden, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From physical pain and emotional rejection to healing on multiple levels. The road ahead would still have challenges. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, but for the first time in years, I face the future without the constant companions of pain and inadequacy. My surgery had fixed more than just my knee. It had been the catalyst for repairing a family broken by favoritism and denial. And while I couldn't change the past, I could now walk confidently into a future where I was seen, valued, and supported not just by my grandfather, but increasingly by my parents and sister as well. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself against family members who didn't believe in you? How did you find the courage to advocate for your needs? Share your story in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more journeys of healing and self-discovery. And remember, sometimes the most important healing happens not in hospitals, but in honest conversations with the people who should have been supporting you all along. Thank you for listening to my story. And may you find the strength to advocate for yourself when those who should believe in you fail to do so.